We've now roped in Professor Dirk Kotze from the Department of Political Sciences at the University of South Africa. Prof, a very good afternoon to you, and thank you so much for your time. So the recent court order essentially paved the way for Treasury to craft a third budget for the 2025-26 fiscal year. Now, this will likely see another battle between the two biggest parties in the GNU. The EFF will also have a significant role to play, one would imagine, especially as it's now also calling for the axing of Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana. What do the next few weeks ahead of the 21st of May have in store for us, do you think?
Well, I think what is most possibly going to happen is that the focus will move away from any form of taxation. Clearly, I think for all the parties it's clear that it won't be acceptable, especially to the public, and that they will have to look for alternative sources of revenue. So I think this will be one of the main focus areas. I think the fact that the main contentious issue has now been removed will make it possibly more easier for the different parties to come to a consensus position, which I think is indeed possible. I think all the history that we have had now of this budget process have forced them to a position of talks, of consultation. And once that is happening, I think all the parties will fall into place.
Yeah, and on that note of consensus, I mean, we were hearing earlier on from the ANC Secretary General, Fikile Mbalula, saying, essentially reiterating that it welcomes the formal withdrawal of the proposal and the proposed VAT increase, of course, by Minister of Finance, and that the outcome is not a legal victory for any party, but a decisive political resolution. He went on to say rooted in consultation and maturity, but he also says, that they will continue to engage other political parties, as you also say, within the GNU too, around the revised fiscal framework. When it comes to the DA and the ANC, I mean, what will it take to reach consensus? Just in that same presser, Mbalula essentially again saying that the DA is anti-transformation.
Yes, I think what we have heard today, one should regard that or interpret that as sort of for public consumption. It is meant for the public in general. It's not necessarily part of the internal debates. It is still a form of damage control, I would say, on the side of the ANC. Other parties still want to claim victory or credit for what has happened. But I think once these talks are starting to happen, then this more sort of public posturing that is taking place will to a large extent disappear for a while. And I think that at the same time, the contestation about what should appear within the budget to a large extent will be also toned down. And that's, in normal terms or in years in the past, very often the parties all agree to the budget. So there is a tendency of developing consensus of the main elements of the budget at least. And I think what here was not so much about the content per se, but rather about the process. And the parties are insisting that they should have been part of it because they are now part of a coalition government or shared government, which they believe didn't happen. And I think all these developments now, including the court case, have taken the ANC specifically to the position where they accept it. In this ANC briefing, they really said that this was a period of learning, of understanding how to do it differently from the past, the way in which the Treasury relates to the Cabinet, and the consultation processes. And I think that to a large extent was the essence of the issue.
Yeah. On the other hand, though, Prof, we heard something slightly different in that there was also a lot of trading and negotiating around what the DA also wanted, essentially from this consensus to go through. I hear you on the process part. But to what extent do you think then we may see or hear other reports saying that, this is what members of the GNU particularly want for the budget to then be approved and stalling on that particular matter and not necessarily looking at the bigger picture of passing that budget. Are you saying that we may not necessarily see a stumbling block this time around?
I may be wrong, but my prediction is, or let's say my intention, or what I can see what is in the pipeline, is rather that they are going to move closer to each other now. The issues about that the Secretary General Fikile Mbalula referred to about, for example, employment equity, the Amendment Act, and so on, I don't think that will anymore continue to be part of the negotiations or packages that come from either the DA or the ANC or any other party. I think these points have been made, and it was part of the bargaining process about that and about the budget per se. So though they were not directly part of it, they were used as bargaining chips, I can almost say.
Yeah.
But now that they are at the point where they are going back to the drawing board, those things will fall away. It's now going to be mainly focused on the budget issues. And yes, there are differences, but it's not as fundamental as the VAT issue was. And I think as a result of that, they will reach some form of compromise before the 21st of May.
Yeah. And I mean, very quickly, Prof, as we wrap up, what role do you think the EFF will play here, particularly as they also are pushing for the dismissal or the axing of Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana, saying essentially that the budget deadlock could have been resolved much earlier?
Well, I think after they've reached now this position where they are now, and where the talks about the budget will proceed again, the EFF, MK and other parties who are not part of the Government of National Unity will most possibly not be so effective because the Government of National Unity do have enough votes in Parliament, around about 70%, in order to pass the budget. So if the parties of the Government of National Unity come together, they have a common understanding of the budget, these other parties will not necessarily have the same sort of influence in the public debate as they had up to now. So I think in that sense, the EFF is not going to play any influential role in what ultimately is going to appear in the budget proposals.
What does the level of volatility that we did see, what does that signal about, political pressure on Treasury and perhaps the executive, especially when you also have to factor in investor confidence, especially so close to the local government elections, do you think, of next year?
Yes, I think what we've seen in the past number of days, is especially those associated with the court case, is that a lot of pressure has come onto Treasury. And I think the Treasury is now much more in the spotlight than ever in the past. I think part of the new dispensation that will develop about the process and the preparation for the next budget in coming years is that the role of the Treasury will most possibly be downscaled, that they will have to become involved in talks with the relevant ministers in the cabinet, those especially related to financial matters, much earlier. There was even now in this reference that it should happen almost immediately after the medium-term expenditure framework speech is presented, normally late in the year, around about October, November, for the next budget in January, February. So I think in that sense, again, the procedural component and how it affects the Treasury is something that's going to be new and different and will involve the political parties and the executive who are in the Government of National much more than in the past. And the more of a collective approach will have to be followed compared to previous years.
Prof, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. Professor Dirk Kotze from the Department of Political Sciences at the University of South Africa. And of course, earlier we had Professor Isaac Kambule from the University of Johannesburg, just on the economic side of things. This follows, of course, the Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana announcing that the 21st of May is the date for the tabling of the country's revised budget.